A divine being fights a man all night long and can't win. Read that sentence again, because it's actually in the text. Not, the man barely survived. Not, the angel let him think he had a chance. Genesis says plainly that when the being realized he could not defeat Jacob, he had to cheat. He touched Jacob's hip and tore it out of its socket just to end the fight. So here's the question almost nobody asks. If this being had that kind of power the entire time, why wait until dawn to use it? Why let the fight go on for hours first? The answer isn't about strength at all. It's about a 20-year pattern in Jacob's life finally getting forced into the open. And once you see what that pattern actually was, this becomes one of the strangest, most personal encounters with God in the entire Bible. Here's where Jacob actually is on this night, because the context changes everything. He's on his way home after 20 years away, and home means facing his brother Esau. The brother Jacob tricked out of his birthright and stole his father's blessing from, using nothing but manipulation and a well-timed lie. Word reaches Jacob that Esau is coming to meet him, and he's bringing 400 men. Jacob has no idea if that's an army coming for revenge or a welcoming party. Genesis 32 says Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, so he does what Jacob has always done his entire life. He starts strategizing. He splits his camp in two, so if Esau attacks one group, the other might survive. He sends wave after wave of gifts ahead of himself, hundreds of animals, sent in separate droves, spaced out, time to soften Esau up before Jacob even shows his face. This is a man managing an outcome through calculation, the exact same instinct that's defined every major decision of his life. And then, that same night, after sending his entire family and everything he owns across the Jabbok River, Jacob is left completely alone. And that's when it happens. Genesis 32:24 says, "A man wrestled with him until daybreak." Not an angel, not explicitly. The Hebrew just says ish, a man. No introduction, no warning, no explanation of who this is or why. Jacob is simply alone in the dark, and something grabs hold of him, and it does not let go. It's only later, in the book of Hosea, that Scripture looks back on this exact night and clarifies what actually happened, that Jacob strove with God, and with the angel he prevailed, weeping and pleading for favor. So the text itself makes you wait. In the moment, in Genesis 32, Jacob has no idea who or what has grabbed him. He's not told he's wrestling God. He just finds himself locked in combat with an unnamed stranger in total darkness, with no way of knowing if this is an attacker, a test, or something else entirely. This goes on for hours, not a brief scuffle. The text is specific, until daybreak, meaning this wrestling match lasts from sometime in the night all the way until the sun starts coming up. Two figures locked together in the dark, on a riverbank, with nobody around to see it, for what could be 6, 7, 8 hours straight. Quick gut check before we go further, because this detail deserves a second of your attention. What kind of confrontation takes an entire night to resolve? Not a fight that's decided in seconds. Something closer to two forces refusing to yield, hour after hour, in total darkness, neither one backing down. Keep that image in mind, because it's about to get stranger. Genesis 32:25 gives us the detail that should stop you cold. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. Read that carefully. The being didn't win. He couldn't win, at least not through ordinary wrestling. A being capable of dislocating a hip joint with a single touch could obviously have ended this fight in the first 30 seconds if he wanted to. He didn't. He let it drag on for hours, matching Jacob hold for hold, refusal for refusal, until he finally used supernatural force just to bring the match to a close. That's not a being struggling to overpower a man. That's a being choosing to let the struggle continue, on purpose, far longer than his actual strength required. So why let it go on that long? This is where the story stops being about a fight and starts being about Jacob's entire life. Go back to the very beginning. Jacob's name means something specific in Hebrew: heel grabber, or more pointedly, he deceives, he supplants. He got that name at birth, coming out of the womb holding on to his twin brother Esau's heel. That name wasn't just a label. It became a prophecy Jacob fulfilled over and over. He grabbed his brother's birthright with a bowl of stew. He grabbed his father's blessing with a disguise and a lie. He grabbed wealth from his father-in-law Laban through selective breeding tricks. Every major turning point in Jacob's life up to this exact night follows the same pattern: grabbing, manipulating, striving to get what he wants through cleverness instead of confrontation. Even the very gifts Jacob sends ahead to Esau earlier that same day follow this exact pattern. He doesn't ride out to meet his brother and simply apologize. He calculates. He sends the animals in separate waves, each one instructed to tell Esau the next gift is coming, spacing out the impact for maximum effect, managing his brother's emotions from a distance the same way he's managed everyone else's his entire life. Right up until the moment he's left alone in the dark, Jacob is still doing what Jacob has always done, trying to control an outcome through strategy instead of facing it directly. And now, alone in the dark, facing a being he cannot out-scheme, Jacob does the one thing his entire life has trained him to do. He grabs hold, and he does not let go. Here's the hidden reason. Say it with me. This wasn't a fight God was trying to win. It was a fight God was letting Jacob finally have honestly. Every other blessing Jacob ever got in his life, he got sideways, through deception, through disguise, through manipulation of people who trusted him. This is the first time in the entire story that Jacob wrestles for something face to face, with nothing hidden, nobody being tricked, no stew, no goat skins, no lies. Just two figures locked together in the dark, and Jacob refusing to release his grip. The being lets the struggle continue for hours because the point was never to see who was physically stronger. The point was to let Jacob's lifelong instinct, grab and don't let go, finally get channeled toward the one thing worth grabbing honestly, an actual blessing from God himself, wrestled for instead of stolen. And this is where the story gets even more remarkable, because even after his hip is dislocated, even in genuine, searing pain, Jacob still doesn't let go. The being says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." And Jacob, wounded, exhausted, barely able to stand, says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Think about the sheer defiance packed into that sentence. This man has been wrestling all night. He's just been supernaturally injured. Dawn is breaking, meaning whatever protection darkness offered is ending. And his response to all of that is to hold on tighter and make a demand. That's not the same Jacob who tricked his way through life avoiding direct confrontation. That's a man who has finally stopped running, stopped scheming, and started holding on with everything he has left, in broad daylight, for something real. The being asks him a strange question in return. "What is your name?" And this should stop you too, because whoever this is clearly already knows exactly who Jacob is, This isn't information gathering. This is forcing Jacob to say it out loud. Jacob answers, Jacob, heel grabber, deceiver, supplanter. He has to speak his own name, his own identity, his entire pattern of manipulation, directly into this encounter before anything changes. There's no transformation offered until Jacob names exactly what he's been. And then the being says, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed. Stop on that word for a second. Prevailed. Not, you survived. Not, you were spared. Prevailed. The same being who could dislocate a hip joint with a single touch tells Jacob he has won. Not by being stronger, by refusing to let go, wounded, at the exact moment giving up, would have been completely understandable. That's what the name Israel actually means. Not simply God's people, which is the shorthand most people know, but literally, he strives with God, or God strives. The entire nation that comes from this man is going to carry, forever, the name of a man who wrestled honestly instead of scheming sideways, and held on through real pain instead of quitting. Think about what just happened to Jacob's identity. His birth name was a prophecy of manipulation, and he lived it out for decades. His new name is a testimony to persistence through real struggle. One name was given to him before he had any say in who he'd become. The second one he had to earn through an entire night of refusing to release his grip. Jacob asks the being's name in return and gets no direct answer. Just, Why is it that you ask my name? And then the being blesses him right there. Jacob names the place Peniel, meaning face of God, and says something remarkable. I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. That line matters more than it sounds like on the surface. Throughout the rest of Scripture, seeing God directly is treated as something no person can survive. Later, God tells Moses plainly that no one can see his face and live. Jacob walking away from this encounter alive, blessed, renamed, is itself part of the miracle. He didn't just survive a wrestling match. He survived an encounter that, by every rule laid out later in the Bible, should have destroyed him. And then comes the detail that ties the entire night together. Genesis 32:31 says the sun rose on Jacob as he passed by Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. He walks away from this encounter permanently marked, not healed, not restored to full strength. Limping. And here's what makes that detail so important. This happens on the exact morning he's about to walk into the most dangerous meeting of his life, face to face with the brother he wronged 20 years earlier, backed by 400 men whose intentions he still doesn't know. Jacob doesn't get to walk into that meeting strong, confident, and physically capable the way his old strategies always relied on. He walks in wounded, limping, carrying visible proof that something happened to him overnight that changed him permanently. The man who spent his whole life relying on cunning and physical advantage now has to face his greatest fear while physically weakened, walking differently than he ever has before. That's not a coincidence, and it's not incidental to the story. Jacob needed to be broken in exactly this specific way before he could face Esau honestly. If he'd walked into that reunion strong, calculating, in full control of his body and his usual sharp instincts, he might have leaned right back into the same old patterns. Manipulation, strategy, staying one step ahead. Instead, he limps toward his brother. Vulnerable, marked. Unable to rely on his old strength even if he wanted to. There's something almost surgical about the timing here. Not a wound Jacob picked up in some unrelated accident years earlier. A wound given to him hours before the one confrontation his entire life had been building toward, in the one part of his body that would affect literally every step he took walking into it. God didn't just bless Jacob that night. He specifically removed the one advantage, physical strength and quick footing, that Jacob might have leaned on to manage his way through seeing Esau again instead of actually facing him. And when Jacob actually reaches Esau in the next chapter, something remarkable happens. There's no trick, no scheme. He bows down 7 times, approaches honestly, and the 2 brothers embrace and weep. 20 years of estranged history, resolved not through Jacob's cleverness, but through a limping, humbled man showing up exactly as broken as that all-night wrestling match had left him. Notice what Esau does in response, too. He doesn't interrogate Jacob about the gifts, or demand explanations, or hold on to decades of resentment the way Jacob clearly feared he would. He runs to meet him. That reunion only works because Jacob shows up as someone new. Not the schemer Esau remembered, but a man visibly changed, walking differently, carrying an actual wound instead of another calculated plan. So here's the actual point of this story, and it's not really about angels or wrestling technique. Jacob spent his entire life getting what he wanted by grabbing sideways, deceiving, manipulating, staying one careful step ahead of anyone who might stop him. And the night before he had to face the one person he'd wronged the most, God met him in the dark and gave him exactly what his whole life had been training him for. Except this time, honestly, face to face, with nothing to hide behind. The wrestling wasn't a test of physical strength. It was Jacob's entire character finally getting to fight for something real instead of stealing it. And the wound he walked away with wasn't a punishment. It was proof. Proof that he'd finally stopped running, stopped scheming, and held on through actual pain until the blessing was real. So here's the question worth taking with you. What's the thing in your life you've been trying to grab sideways, manipulating your way toward, managing through strategy and control, instead of actually wrestling for it honestly, face to face, even if it costs you something? Jacob spent decades being clever instead of being honest, and it never actually gave him peace. It took one long, painful, unavoidable night, alone in the dark, with nowhere left to run, before he finally got real. Sometimes the thing you're trying to out-scheme is exactly the thing you need to stop running from and hold on to instead, wound and all, until it actually blesses you. You might not walk away with a limp, but if you're honest, you probably already know what you've been trying to grab sideways instead of wrestling for directly. Maybe it's a relationship you've been managing instead of showing up honestly for. Maybe it's a conversation you keep engineering instead of just having. Maybe it's forgiveness you've been trying to negotiate your way around instead of actually asking for, face to face, the way Jacob finally had to. The blessing was always available to Jacob. He just spent most of his life trying to take it sideways instead of holding on long enough to receive it honestly. If this changed how you read this story, subscribe. Next week, I'm covering the hidden reason Jacob's 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel in a completely different birth order than most people assume, and why that order actually matters. Tell me in the comments, what's something in your life you've been managing through strategy instead of actually wrestling with honestly? See you in the next one.